Thank you. Good afternoon for people in India. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. The global idea we had at Salveo is try to address a paradox. The paradox is the following. French exporters, European exporters contemplate India when they take a look at the macroeconomics with fantastic growth, with the largest population in the world, obviously with massive opportunities. But in fact, we realize that there are a certain number of perceptions that slow the decision of French exporters to address the Indian market, to further develop in the Indian market. Of course, it's a generality, and generality are always wrong. The CAC 40, the large groups are already established in India. There's no issue. Most of the large companies are established in India. We will more focus today on small and mid caps, for whom India is a mystery, is always hesitate saying a country, it's a continent of challenges. So the global idea is to try to better the visibility of India today as a business opportunity, as a business destination, and also try to address the questions that are normally used by French exporters. For this event, I have the great honor and the great pleasure to welcome my two friends. Raman, over to you. If you can present yourself briefly, that would be great.
Thank you. My name is Raman, and I'm right now in Mumbai. And I'm a chartered accountant, which is an equivalent of, say, a CPA. It's in between a lawyer and an accountant, but it's the test is much higher in India. It's one of the toughest exams to clear on this planet. We have been incorporating companies.
I have an impression the link with Mumbai, or maybe it's our link in Paris. Well, in that case, Konark, can you take over? So I have the pleasure to introduce you Konark Bandari. Can you tell us about your achievements, your training, your background?
Well, briefly. Thank you for having me on this call, Tristan. As you know, we have been, I represent Salveo in the Indian market. We are working together for over 4 years now. And we have been doing a variety of missions, helping French corporates and companies in the Indian market. As a quick background, my background is a student of economics from New York University, and had a stint in investment banking, following which I spent a large part of my career doing business development, cross-border business development in particular, partnerships between Indian and global companies, primarily for the Indian market, covering areas such as aerospace, defense, infrastructure, power sectors. In the recent past, thanks to Salveo, we have been doing work apart from infrastructure and power, also in domains of medical systems, medical diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, as well as certain aerospace areas. So it gives me great pleasure to be here. I have been able to view the cross-border interactions between foreign companies and Indian companies and the mindsets over the last decade and a half. And I'm very happy to be able to share whatever little snippets I have for the participants on this webinar.
Thank you very much, Konark. I think we have a small problem of connection with Raman, but we will continue like this.
Tristan, you can hear me now?
Oh, yes, you're back. Great. So please finish your introduction, my friend.
So as I was saying, I don't know where I left off, but I've been dealing with numerous incorporations in last 2 decades. That's a little bit after India opened up in 1991. And I have also authored a book on Make It in India, which is, starting and doing business in India, and have consulted with several European as well as non-EU companies to set up their business here. In fact, this last week, we were just at a inauguration of an entity which, hit 200 crore milestone, and they set up a new factory just outside Pune. So with that background, I'm happy to be part of this seminar, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Raman. I need to highlight something to the people who are listening to us this morning. So Raman addresses problematics of both large groups, large corporations, as well as mid-caps, small companies, with the same efficiency, with the same professionalism. And I thank you for that, Raman. I really appreciate your presence this morning. First topic I wanted to evoke with you, my friends, is the perception that we have from a general point of view. The perception that we have of India is that India is a protectionist country. This is probably due to the history. Who would like to say a few words about that?
I'll start with a few words, and of course I'll let Raman sir take the lead. But frankly speaking, to be totally transparent, if you were to give a one-word answer to your question, it would be yes. India has always had a trend of protectionist policies from its history due to socialist and foreign exchange substitution policies, which didn't really serve the country well. The economy opened up in 91, which brought in a lot of investment and turned India's story around. But that said, there is a paradox in Indian policy between they are very keen to want inward investment. But if you look at the policy objectively, you will see that India has some of the highest tariffs in the world when it comes to the G20 countries. In fact, India has the highest average tariffs of all G20 countries. So there is a paradox in what India is trying to do. Going forward, and we were seeing a downward trend in tariffs, but since pandemic, it has now started to creep upwards again. And today, from a broad perspective, the Indian government's protectionist policies are now geared more towards China than the West. But going forward, they will have to look at easing this in order to allow India to fully integrate itself into the global economic trade system, because they seem to be losing out to players such as Vietnam when we talk about this. Okay. Raman sir, I leave this to you.
I think every country, to my mind, acts from their interest. And being a sovereign, I think each country decides what is in their best interest. And oftentimes when we look at, different countries, from where we stand, we look at things as protectionist or, not protectionist. For example, a few years ago, globalization was sort of the mantra for last maybe 15, 20 years. And suddenly everywhere the walls are sort of coming up. I think I would say that India, at least in last 10 years or so, under the present regime, is looking more open and also is considering what is in its interest. For example, one of the largest car maker wanted, tons of discounts to import cars into India. And I believe what is reported in the press, India told them that, why don't you set up a manufacturing unit here instead of, just market the cars. And this is one of the, top of the league car companies that we all know, at least in America. And probably they're thinking that by Jan, they'll end up setting up a factory here. So considering its background from the colonial past, that it was simply taken over for about 150 years from being, 22% of global trade that it had. And when the British left, India was less than 1%. So with that background, and of course the whole socialist thing that Konark mentioned that crept in after its independence, that made India more socialist because of widespread poverty, etc., which today the abject poverty has come down to less than 1%. But from where we stand today, I would feel that this has been the most positive years that I have seen in last 25 years of my practice.
Okay, very interesting point. I like that figure that before the colonial era, India was weighing 22% of the global trade, and after 1%. So the raise, we are today seeing the comeback of India as a world player, I would say proportional to the population and the size of the country. So it's more a correction than coming out of the blue. And we, as Europeans, we saw exactly the same thing happening with China. China was weighing less than 5% before Deng Xiaoping. And now they are the second power. So it gives a fantastic perspective, I think, for the Indian economy. It's just a matter of correcting an error of the past. Okay, great. That's a good point. So it is, of course, as a conclusion of this first topic, there are some protectionist laws and regulations in India. What I understood from what Raman said is that if you invest locally, if you integrate local content, you can go beyond. Am I correct? As you are also a specialist of aerospace and defense, I think local content is an issue.
On a general level, if you look at the strategy, it's more to invite investment rather than pure imports. Eventually, imports will also become easier. But today, the perspective and the focus of the government is to create more manufacturing in India, create more jobs in India, while also protecting some of the weaker sections of the economy as well as the society. So it's a balance. Coming into India and manufacturing has gotten better, easier than it ever has. Infrastructure is better. You have ease of doing business has gotten better. So, and the market is growing larger. So that is where we stand today. That said, there's a lot of trade coming into India. It all depends on which segment a company is targeting and whether it is a large scale segment, a mass market segment, or it is a premium segment. In the upper to premium segment, there is still a lot of scope for direct imports. But if you're in the mass market segment, you would be recommended to set up local manufacturing.
Very good. Interesting point. So as a conclusion for French exporters or European exporters, if your offer has a certain level of innovation, of differentiation, there are definitely opportunities in India. If you are more on the mass market and if your offer is more undifferentiated, then it's important to contemplate local production.
That is probably the only way to get into it.
It's probably the only way. Okay, great. Last question about this, protectionist subject. And, I'd like you to give us a little bit the perception that Indian business people have of French suppliers. How is the French offer perceived by the Indian counterparts?
Well, it's a very broad subject, of course, because when you say French offer, it's everything from
Vuitton to Airbus.
Yeah, basically. So we're talking about wine and cheese all the way to planes and rockets. So, of course, quickly, of course, we have a strategic partnership which has flourished over the last, well, it's always been there, but has really flourished over the last 2-3 decades, which is of a security and geopolitical dimension. Putting that aside, as we know, the entire CAC 40 is almost the entire, if not the entire CAC 40 is already present in India. They are already employing hundreds of thousands of people, doing about 15 billion euros in revenues within India. So they are already in India. What is the perception from an Indian perspective of French players? There is one end the high technology, which they are seen to be in, and on the other end there is the domain of personal care, where they are seen to be really having a very positive perception, world leaders, market leaders, trendsetters. Then there is also the food and wine. So within these segments, there is always a premium perception. France in general means premium. There are other French companies who have come into India and they have totally localized their offerings. In that case, this is a global corporate with a local product. I would not categorize that as a French perception in that case. But in the case of the French products, it's always seen as a premium product, generally speaking.
Raman, sir, would you like to add something on the perception of French exporters in India?
I think I feel that we have had a very good mix of things. If you look at, say, cars, Renault has been around for a long time. We have BNP as a bank around for, I think, more than 100 years, if I'm not mistaken. We have certain other companies which are in the services sector. I don't know how the ownership is, like Capgemini, or we have. I have grown up sitting in Airbus planes since I was a kid. So we have a very good mix in that sense. But I feel that the perception here would be that they are more dependable. They are, I think French products and services are more dependable. They are sort of sturdy, long-term things that you can buy being an Indian. And I feel that Indians would generally feel very good about European products because of the proximity and maybe some other reasons. And I think French sort of fits very well there.
Okay, so it's very encouraging for the exporters that are listening to us. I can testimony that when you enter India to do business, you are warmly welcomed. Many French exporters, new exporters, people that are starting in their internationalization, I think that India is reserved for the Anglo-Saxon world. It's not true. It's definitely open to alternative offers than Anglo-Saxon traditions. A quick subject I wanted to evoke also to clean that from the people's mind. Are there any currency exchange limitation in India? If you have a customer in India, is it easy for your customer to bring back money in Europe, or if you generate profits in India, are there some limitation to transfer between rupees and euros? Raman, sir, I think you're...
So, currency has been a problem. If you look at 1991, when India opened up, it was left with, handful of $1 billion in its account, and it could probably pay its bills for next few weeks. And that was one of the reasons which forced Indian government to look beyond the socialism that it kind of imported from Soviet and other places, and that whole ideology had to be diluted. So if we start from 91, which is 27, 28 years back, we had very few dollars left to even purchase oil, and India is a very the top import of India is oil, and considering the amount of population that is there, you need fuel to do almost everything. Without energy, things just don't move, and therefore currency has always been a controlled commodity, if we can say so. And on current account also, if we look at, say, capital account and current account in banking parlance, we had a lot of restrictions on the current account as well. Current account would mean, for example, if I went to Paris, when my dad went to America, he got probably some $25 in the 60s to spend in his 3-week trip. Today, probably if Konark is in Paris, Konark wouldn't have faced any problem to take currency, use his card, use any kind of unrestricted spending that he can do. Now, looking at that change, we have come a long way. So, if there is a French investor, if they invested money into India, they would be able to take back the entire capital along with any accretion to that capital. For example, I set up a company 15 years back, and I would like to do a buyback of some of my shares, or if I want to wind up and leave, I would be able to take equivalent euros back after converting the INR assets that I have. So far as profits are concerned, there is almost zero restriction, except transfer pricing applies, which is a OECD norm that India follows. But if I have to declare 100% dividend, send all my profits out, I can do that. If I want to give royalties, I could do that subject to certain limits. So in that sense, for interest, I don't have a problem, but the interest is pegged to a Eurobor interest rate plus, couple of percentage. So it's not completely, I can give any amount of interest, which probably no other country would also permit. We have a current account is completely open, and capital account also with permission. All these things are very much possible. So I feel we have come a very long way if we look back till where we stand today.
Great, thank you. So it's really important to integrate that for the exporters. There are no restrictions. It's easy to convert rupees into euros. There are not such issues as the type of issues you can encounter in countries like, Egypt or other African countries like Algeria or Nigeria or Angola, where hard currency are very scarce.
No, there's no problem as such. It's just procedural. If I may put it in a very simple language, it's just a matter of procedure, and even those procedures are increasingly getting streamlined with the banks. So, like dividend payment is just a procedural thing. You have to declare a board resolution and open a dividend account in particular, and then transfer the dividend. It's as simple as that. It could take as less as a couple of weeks.
Very important point, and it makes the exporter fees much better. What about the stability of the exchange rate with euro and dollar?
The Indian exchange rates with the major currencies, and generally speaking, is always depreciating slowly over time, and this has always been the case. But that said, it's fairly stable. So in a long-term trend, it's depreciating currency, and that works well for India, given that it wants to create exports, and it is a big importer of oil. So this is one of the reasons why it's generally depreciating. But it's a stable regime, and there is intervention of the Reserve Bank of India if there are any fluctuations. It's market-led, but there are interventions to avoid fluctuations.
Great. Okay, very important. So it's not a situation like South Africa, for example, when the rand goes up and down and up and down. No, it's much more.
Well, it's a larger country with a larger ecosystem, so therefore it is much more. There's a lot of depth, so there will not be that much fluctuation to begin with, because there's a large amount of exports and imports. But that said, the Reserve Bank of India is very active in managing fluctuations for businesses, to even it out for businesses. That is a mandate they have.
Okay, great. It's a good point to keep in mind. Thank you very much for that. Other perception that exporters have when they talk about India are related to payment habits. So what are the normal payment terms an exporter can offer to an Indian customer. And related to that payment habit, also the perception of corruption, but it's another subject we will address. So first thing, payment habits. Raman, sir, what is the normal payment term one French exporter should grant to his Indian counterpart?
So I would say that it's as good as any other market. It's between the buyer and the seller to fix the payment term. There is no government control to put some kind of a term that you can't pay before this. So you can take advance if you are a strong seller. You can decide whether you want 30, 60, 90 days. I've seen all of these from 30 to 45, 60, 90 days. I have also seen a lot of entities giving advance money for shipping goods into India. So payment practices that way are pretty flexible, and the buyer and seller can figure that out.
Is it easy to establish a letter of credit, for example?
Oh, yes, because almost all the international banks have either their own presence or they have a correspondent bank here with whom they have tied up. So a letter of credit is also very much feasible. It's fairly easy to deal with your bank wherever you are located, and then get that sorted out in India. I think logistics might be a slight challenge to get the goods out, to get it moving inside the country, etc. But I think from a financial perspective, it's between the banks.
Okay, great point. So as a piece of advice, if I could make a shorter conclusion about that for French exporters, all the modern tools to trade are available in India, letter of credit and so forth. Once you've built sufficient trust with your local partner, it's possible to grant credit. Of course, the length of the credit given needs to take into account the logistical difficulties in the country for the distributor, for example, to distribute the goods. And this takes time, and this has to be taken into account by the exporter when it comes to the subject of granting some time to pay.
Yeah, okay. That's purely between the two parties. They have to negotiate between themselves. And with regards to the logistics aspect, some products, logistics, customs clearance, testing of samples, etc., takes longer time, and some products is a little bit easier. But things are moving in the right direction. A lot of things have gotten automated. A lot of things are web-based, and like I said, things are moving in the right direction even on that front. But it's not to the global OECD standards yet.
Okay, great. Very encouraging also. Corruption. Corruption is a subject that I wanted to raise with you. As you both know, Raman Konark, French exporters of any size now are under scrutiny of the US anti-corruption laws that are extraterritorial, so that apply for business done between France and India also. But in France, we have also the Agence Française Anticorruption that is deeply looking into transactions and so forth. So it is a major issue for French exporters to avoid situations where to enter into non-ethics procedures. What is the global perception of that subject, Konark, in India?
So when we talk about India from the point of view of an exporter from France or a company from France looking at India, corruption is not really something that comes into, because these are more like trades between a buyer and a seller. The corruption ecosystem with regards to the government regulations in India are more designed around public sector corruption and prevention of corruption with regards to the Corruption Act, as well as the money laundering. These are the areas where there is like great scrutiny in India around money laundering and public service corruption. There is a little bit also around whistleblower protection, but these are things which are basically focused on the public sector in India. And money laundering is a large issue, which the Indian authorities are very focused on. And this is something I think Raman sir can definitely illuminate in depth over. And I think that's the crux of the corruption issue, I would say, from an exporter's perspective.
Okay. Raman sir, would you like to add something on that?
Yeah, I think, like Konark said, corruption often is, when there is a large purchase to be made, whether a seller can influence the decision of the buyer. So far as, a number of sellers who are competing for that order are concerned, if they are, of the same quality, then oftentimes the seller wants to influence the buying decision, and for that it does a few things to influence that decision and bring that decision in the favor of a particular seller. For example, I don't need to elaborate more on that, and I think that's where the corruption element can come in. But so far as most other government processes are concerned, for example, one is obviously your negotiation, that's between buyer and seller. Second is your banking process, where there is no question of any corrupt practices. The third would be at the time of dispatch and removal of goods after they land in India. That's where there may be some element of slow process, but you might have your custom house agents who will figure out how that works. But I see that there's a huge amount of electronic processes that have developed over last several years, and therefore this discretion, which breeds corruption, that discretion is taken away in many cases. So therefore this element is restricted to a very large extent. So it's nowhere like one may see in probably very, very underdeveloped countries of, say, Africa or somewhere else. Now we have come a very long way to overcome that discretion part by the use of technology.
Thank you very much for that. So as a conclusion, my recommendation is, as always, for the French exporters, you absolutely need, when you're an exporter, to comply with anti-corruption laws. No issue. The best thing one can do to address this situation is to make a precise screening of what your competitor is doing. If you, at some stage, realize that your favorite competitor is going through non-ethics procedures, it is for you a golden bullet. So this is, as in all countries, I mean, corruption is pretty much spread all over the planet. There's no issue about saying that this one is more corrupted than the other one. Screen your competitors. If, I would say, by chance, you highlight the fact that your competitor is corrupting someone, you have a golden bullet to win the market. So, and to make it public. When you discover that your competitor is corrupting, make it public, and it will be a winning situation. So never enter into non-ethics behavior, and screen your competitor. It's the best way to address this corruption subject. Thank you very much, Sir, for that. Let's go now in real operational subjects. Talking about market entry strategies. In India, more than in other countries, understanding the playground, the rules, is key. Can you testimony a little bit on that?
So, yeah, I mean, let's start with a very simple premise. Unless it's a very niche domain, probably almost any company entering India is probably stepping into an intensely competitive environment. So in that case, that coupled with the fact that India is extremely price sensitive market, your first step has to be to take a snapshot of the market landscape to see your competition and the regulatory framework in which you're coming into. So this is the first thing to know, that there will be a lot of competition in every domain in India. There is a lot of Indian companies, there will be international companies. So the other aspect also at the first level is that India is not a market of quick wins. India is a market where you have to have a medium to long-term strategy. You need a lot of time to settle down, to create the right teams, to understand the market, to modify your product for local requirements if required. And then you will start to see results if you have the staying power. In most cases, it's a volume-driven business model rather than a price business model. So these are the general framework of entering the market in India.
Okay.
I would say.
Okay.
This is the broad context.
Yeah,
Now when it comes to, for example, when it comes to really understanding how you enter, do you come in directly? Do you come in a JV with a partner or with a licensing agreement? These are things which you have to assess on a case-by-case basis. They all have their own merits. One thing I can say is that finding a partner in India might not be a beautiful option when you think about it from outside, but this will help you a lot to navigate the local circumstances, the regulations, the Indian business environment, the Indian culture, and can turbocharge, if it's the right partner, your entry into the Indian market. So whether to come alone or to come through an Indian partner is a key decision. And in a lot of cases, whether the Indian partner is a joint venture partner or just a distributor, it makes a lot of sense to look at this very deeply. It's not a small market, it's a large market, and therefore players on the ground who know how to do business in India are an extreme value add.
great. Thank you for that. So important to keep in mind, Indian, of course, is immense, is wide, is complex. So more than in any countries, preparation is key. You need to understand the key stakeholders, the competition, the rules, the tariffs, the difference between the different states and so forth. So more than in any other country, you need to understand the playground. You need to understand the rules that will apply to your domain. So preparation is key. You cannot arrive in India like this, hi, I'm great, I'm going to do business there. You need to get super prepared more than in other geographies due to the size, due to the complexity.
I'll add another thing, just one more thing to add. If you're a direct supplier, it's one element. If you're an investor into India, there's another dimension, which is that all the states of India are now increasingly encouraged to compete with each other to provide incentives and subsidies to investors. And there are clusters, specific clusters of excellence, which are in different states. So it will require deep thinking over like where one is to invest in India, given the competitive environment of subsidies and incentives being offered by different states in India. We call it competitive federalism.
Okay, great. So opportunity analysis between the various states. Regarding distributors and agents, Raman, I may have some questions for you. Let's take an example. I'm an exporter. I make a deal with a distributor in India. Business is going fine for 3, 4, 5 years. But at some stage, I want to change distributor. I found a distributor with more geographical capacities, so covering more. when I change distributor, is it required to pay an indemnity to indemnify the former distributor?
So,
Is there by law? Huh?
So it will depend on the product, number one, what kind of, for example, if you are selling pharma products, then something would be very different than selling certain other type of goods. Second, I would say that, how is the contract drafted? And I would really encourage all my clients to ensure that the contract is very well drafted, it's put in place, it is registered, it has legal force, so on and so forth. And it's not very loose, and not a lot of things are just left to a usual understanding of things. So in India, what we do is normally we would like the contracts to be very clearly stating lot of things which may otherwise be taken for granted or taken as understood. So if the contract in that sense has well-defined boundaries and timelines and expectation from each of the parties, then I think most of the problems will get resolved out of the contract itself.
Okay, so your recommendation, if I understand well, is when you set up a distribution contract or an agent contract, it's important to plan the exit, the termination. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very. It's always difficult. I mean, I've been an exporter for several years. When you start to do business with a distributor, it's like a wedding. And when you get married, you don't often think about divorce. At least in the contract. So it's a tricky issue, and one should keep that in mind very precisely.
More so maybe in India to start, because you see it's such a large country that depending on the product, of course, you might have sub-distributors, regional distributors. So therefore, the flexibility to change distributor or at some point appoint a master distributor for the country, especially now given the advent of e-commerce, this flexibility is very important in your contractual relationship.
Okay. So worst case scenario, you enter, you start to litigate. You have an issue with your distributor, with your agent. You want to go to court. What about the fairness of Indian courts with this?
I'll just give a very general statement here. I'll allow Raman sir to add to it. But there is all entities are treated equal under the Indian legal system. So there is no disparity between entity A and B. That said, the Indian legal system is notorious for delays and time taken to give a verdict. But given this statement, which could be years, it could take years, 4 or 5 years to get a verdict out of the Indian legal system.
It's not much better in France,
But that the one thing which I would like to point out, which is very important for this conversation, is the system of interim orders. So there is a system in the Indian legal system of interim order, wherein an order can be passed by the court that can freeze a certain position or ask for the parties to put some money in an escrow or other related contractual disputes, so that is in itself a punitive action for the parties, which therefore forces them to go for settlement. So this is in lieu of the time taken by the Indian legal system. Interim orders is kind of the lifeline for litigants in India. Raman sir?
I would say that, when we used to still have the World Bank's ease of doing business surveys and parameters come out, one of the worst things that India fared on was implementation of a contract. And that says it all, that, when you have to legally enforce a contract, it's hardest in India, and it still remains so in so many sections of businesses. So I would feel that when you enter a contract, the contract is really, really well defined. You give it all the legal force that it needs, such as registration, etc. And the third part would be that you think from an angle that how will you manage the risk? Because you may have various types of risk. For example, you may have a certain amount of value of product lying with the distributor. Now, how would you want to manage that risk? So I would feel that not to think of, not to plan to, end up in the court. Like in many countries, people love going to the court for getting some, verdict, which is very quick. Sometimes it's very disproportionately large as well. In India, I would feel that not to plan to end up in a court, and plan your affairs and manage your affairs in a way that you don't have to go to the court to enforce a specific contract.
Yeah. So the piece of recommendation is definitely negotiate, find a gentleman agreement.
Exactly.
This is much better than going to the court, but there is a fairly reasonable level of fairness of the courts if it's the only solution. There's no big stress to go to the court there, and it's a very positive point, I think, in when you contemplate India as a business destination.
If you keep aside the time taken for verdict, we see foreign entities getting verdicts in their favor very regularly, and even against the government of India in court.
Okay.
So in fact, government of India is one of the largest litigant in Indian courts, and at least from a tax angle, at a tribunal level, which is the lowest level, the 70-75% of verdicts go against the department, the tax office. At a higher level, it's almost 90%. So that says it all, that oftentimes the government becomes a litigant, and government wants to do certain things which is beyond the law. But at the level of the courts, those things get squashed, and the citizen or the businessman or whoever, they have won much more than the government. So I would feel that from that sense, the courts are, fair, rather than going with, government or, public policy, etc., etc. They would rather want to read the law in the sense it should be read.
Thank you very much, sir. So, which leads me directly to the topic of interest for many French businesses. India is often contemplated as a great sourcing country because of low labor costs, of course, but also because of high engineering capacities and so forth. So having this positive legal environment, I would say, it is really important to consider India as a sourcing capacity. Can you tell us a few words about sourcing India, sourcing contracts, your experience, Pranav?
Very broadly speaking, Tristan, sourcing India can be a very key target market for sourcing. We have developed very deep capabilities in pharmaceuticals, in auto components, in textiles, and increasingly in engineering. And we are increasingly exporting to the rest of the world. Couple that with the fact that Indian infrastructure, which was a big missing piece in the Indian sourcing story, which hindered the competitiveness both on a price as well as a responsivity in terms of timelines of Indian exporters, is being addressed extremely quickly and rapidly. Today, India sees itself as a sourcing destination, Is it totally ready to take advantage of the China plus one strategy? It's starting to get there. There's a lot of movement within the government around the Make in India campaigns and exporting campaigns. Along with that, the incentivization campaigns, which are being created by the government of India for key sectors, both at the federal level as well as the state level. So there are incentives given by the central government of India for something called the production-linked incentive, where they want to create newer capacities in domains such as electronics manufacturing, auto components, pharmaceuticals, where they are giving subsidies linked to production, in addition to all there is already, like advanced cell chemistry, solar modules, hydrogen, so on and so forth. When it comes to state level incentives, like we said earlier, all the states are fighting with each other to quote investment, and they are willing to give, you can have, if you're a large investor, a direct discussion with state on incentive packages.
Okay, great. So definitely India has to be contemplated as an alternative to China from a sourcing point of view.
Absolutely. Today we are there, and it's a growing story. So we might not be as much taking advantage of the China plus one as a Vietnam is currently, but it's a long-term growing trend. And in the next 5 years, when you have key pieces of infrastructure in place, like the dedicated freight corridor, both in the west and the east, it will be a game changer.
Right. And as you said, geopolitical context makes India very attractive because it is not contemplated as the same way as the made in China.
One thing I will say from a perception point of view, that India is not seen as a IP theft destination. So this is something which India definitely has a big positive in terms of perception.
IP, intellectual property.
Intellectual property. We do not have this kind of reputation in all the industries that sourcing is done from India, where we are stealing know-how and creating our own competencies. So this is it's never been a case from India, and this also goes in our favor in the long run.
Raman sir, would you like to add something on that, and on sourcing issues or contracting, specific issues regarding sourcing?
I think Konark has mentioned everything. I would just add to that mainly for quality or specifications, one may want to consider that how these products are made, how they are shipped out, if the quality control is adequately covered, especially in the beginning. And that communication gap bridging becomes very important because oftentimes you are dealing with the other person from a completely different background, and the way they understand something may be quite different from the way you understand. And therefore, that close collaboration right at the beginning for a sustained period of time, few 6 months, a year, whatever, becomes very important to my mind, where there is somebody on the ground who is looking at the quality aspects, etc., to ensure that when it reaches its destination, you have got exactly what you asked for.
Thank you very much for that.
I can just add to that some example. Recently, IKEA has set up in India for the first time, and they were in plans to do this, but they have spent so much time to create the ecosystem and the quality ecosystem, sourcing and quality standards, that they announced coming into India maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and only have really opened their stores about a year ago. So they really worked with the local ecosystem on their standards, on their processes, and then took their time before coming to market.
Which leads me perfectly, thank you for that, Konark, which leads me to the transition. If you export, you need to partner with local people to have local sales forces. If you source, you need to have quality control locally, enter into the ecosystem, which leads me to the labor laws in India. Is it easy to hire and to fire someone in India? How flexible are the labor laws in India? What type of employment contracts are available. Can you tell us a few words about that, Raman sir?
Hiring is quite easy. In fact, recently you would find that there is some crunch for talent, including at some of the lowest levels. Even firing, you can have different types of contract. The labor laws have been recently revamped. They just need to come into force, but they have combined the 3 different laws and blended it into one. Labor is still a slight challenge, but so far as the cost is concerned, it would be much lesser than what I see my French friends telling me. You would have some, provident fund that you add to your direct labor cost. You will add some gratuity after they're finished 5 years. But other than that, most other things are quite reasonable. There isn't too much on top that one ends up paying on top of the salary to the labor.
What is the percentage of compulsory for unlimited employment contract? What is the compulsory level of contribution?
So you pay around 12.5% after you cross 20 people. That is the contribution by the company, and the employee also needs to contribute out of his salary towards something that we call provident fund, which is like a super in most other countries, superannuation, and the government gives more than 8.5% interest on those contributions on a yearly basis, and that money sits with the government. You get some tax benefits by contributing to that, and if an employee completes 5 years, then after that you can start being accountable for payment of gratuity when they retire. At the same time, you can hire people as professionals as well. So you can have it as instead of a service contract, you can hire them as a professional, especially if they're skilled technicians, etc. And then there is, you can immediately fire them, you can end the contract. You can do so many things which will be directly based on the manner in which you have entered the contract.
Okay, so this is a very important point. India is far away from Europe. Cultural habits are different, so it's important to base your export or your imports on local talents. So there are plenty of local talents. This is something quite obvious. And the labor laws are reasonably flexible. I mean, we are in France, we have the most strict labor laws with very expensive contribution. So the French exporters will discover 2 things in India. It's lower contribution level and of course lower salary. From my personal experience, the labor market is very fluid in India. If you have a talent, if you want to keep the talent, you need to pay reasonably well because people can change job for a few hundred euros. So it's important to be kind of generous with your with the people that are key in your Indian organization. And being generous costs less in India than in France. So this can apply even before opening a subsidiary. We have several cases together with Conarc where we recommend our customer to get an outstaffing contract. So we can hire on Salveo payroll locally a sales development person, a sourcing specialist, a technician support, whatever. And this doesn't require to open a subsidiary, setting up a company. Setting up a company is stage 2, I think. You want to say some words on that? Maybe?
Yeah, for sure. We can help to de-risk entry for someone who's looking to enter the Indian market, they can hire indirectly through us. Raman sir stated a very important point also, whether outstaffing or not, that there are different types of contracts. Some have much more flexibility, whether it's a contract of service versus contract for service. And contract for service is different, where basically you can much more flexible, you can walk away immediately, whereas contract of service is requiring all these contributions and funds and so on and so forth. So relative flexibility, not total, but coming to attrition rates, high attrition rates in some sectors because of talent being poached around. So therefore, keep a hold of the good people.
Thank you. I see the timing.
But I would like a few minutes because we need to cover one topic, my friend. Before.
Digitalization of India.
Because
I absolutely agree. We decided to cover that subject together with Connor because in several cases we assisted some French exporters to enter the Indian market, and we discovered that the level of digitalization in the country is very much in advance compared to where we are in Europe. The specific subject that we have seen is biology, diagnostics, and so forth, where India is far ahead of what we saw. Would you like to say some words about?
I just want to give a general touch, and Raman sir will cover, but I thought we should cover this before we move to Q&A, especially for French exporters, whether coming into India to just supply or manufacture, even the ones who are looking just to supply their product into India, especially with the consumer focus. This is a key thing to note. Today, India's internet penetration is extremely high. We have 800 million people connected to the internet. On top of that, we have, since we were moving towards e-commerce, and that got, like everywhere in the world, got catalyzed by the pandemic. Today, I would say we know that all the PIN codes of India are covered by e-commerce. And it is no longer just a game which is limited to what we call the metros or the tier 1 cities of India. They say up to 60% of all e-commerce sales are now happening in tier 2 and tier 3 cities of India. In addition to that, there are large platforms covering apparel, electronics, beauty, which is a huge segment and especially should be of interest to beauty authorities, to French exporters, as well as for medicines. These platforms ranging from Amazon to Flipkart to Nykaa for beauty, Tira Beauty, Tata's, they have created an ecosystem which is very user-friendly. Onboarding is extremely easy for a very low fee, and they are providing end-to-end services as required by different vendors, from logistics to payments and the payment cycles are very low, from 7 to 14 days. And it's really opened up a huge market where companies would first come, set up distributors, physical sales. Now everything is online. The flip side is it's a much more competitive environment too. But entry has become far easier. If you have a very distinguished product, you might look at D2C, which is you control your branding, you control your own channel delivery. And even on that front, you have end-to-end logistics suppliers who work with you. And a lot of companies do a combination, which is having their own branding and D2C approach, direct, as well as listing themselves on the platforms too, so that they have a larger reach. And this has become a huge opportunity for people with products who have the confidence in their products to come into the Indian market. Access to the market has become democratized like never before.
This is really important. Retail has been an issue in India due to logistical difficulties, the size of the country, and the lack of infrastructures. E-commerce is solving extremely rapidly this situation. So a digital market entry strategy in India definitely makes sense when you are in a consumer market.
One other thing to add, and I don't know if our guests really know, but we have in India called the UPI, the United Payments Interface, which is basically almost every person in India now has a payments app, which is on their phone, which speaks to each other. And even for as little as 5 cents, we are using now payments apps from our phones to pay a vendor on the street for fruits or for cigarettes. So it's totally revolutionized the entire ecosystem of digital payments. And that coupled with e-commerce, this is the total game changer, but increased competition.
Thank you very much, Konark, for this testimony. Of course, India is a subject on which we could speak for a very long time. Raman sir, would you like to add something on e-commerce or make the conclusion? Because unfortunately, we need to conclude now that very interesting webinar.
Yeah, I think this is the most interesting part. And Indian e-commerce is slated, if you look at the forecast, it's going to become hugely bigger than what it is already. And if I give you some statistics and I'll leave you with that, the UPI that Konark mentioned, today we have the world's largest digital transaction system. It has 300 million Indians using it already. It has 500 million merchants accepting. And it took decades to reach 5 to 6 million POS machines, and this is where we have reached between 2016 and today. So from Google Pay to whatever else, we have almost 1 billion transaction that is slated to happen per day so far as digital transactions are concerned. So that's really huge, and it has resulted in huge formalization of economy where people would otherwise carry cash home. They are now, all that money has come into the banking system. So I can go on and on, but from a digital angle, all the taxes are digital, all filings are digital. There is no paper filing, whether you want to start a company, whether you want a GST registration, a VAT registration, all of it is digital. So in that sense, and some of the digitization is at the level of the invoice. So if I sold you something, that invoice will be correlated with the credit you take on your side. So that correlation is at a 1-to-1 level, which is as detailed as it can get. I think Brazil was the only country that tried it, and probably it didn't work, or it did work. So that's the level of digitization that we are looking at.
Yeah, last year we had 62 billion transactions on UPI, and this year it will be probably exponentially higher. So this is the future. It's here.
It's really important. So this is amazing, and this changes also the perception that we sometimes have in Western Europe. When you enter India, you enter modernity. This has to be kept in mind on this digitalization subject. You are ahead from the old continent. This has to be taken into account. Would you like to make a conclusion, Konark?
I would just like to say, depending on what we are trying to bring into India, there is space for premium, higher end, and then there is space for commodities. Do your homework well, read the market well, assess whether you want to come in directly or indirectly, have one partner or multiple partners, do your contracts really well, as Raman sir has said, and once these things are in place, the strength of your product and the localization you can offer in the context of the Indian user's taste and appetite, there is opportunity. But you have to de-risk through doing all these steps that we spoke about.
Thank you very much, Konark. Thank you very much. Raman, sir, a quick conclusion?
Yes. Yeah, just two things on top of what Konark said. One is to have, some connection with India. I think in the long term, every person who is doing something with India, some trade, some commerce, some activity which is of commercial nature, that would definitely bring good results in the coming years, I feel. Second is to have a good advisor in India. I have felt that over my experience, it really becomes very important to have somebody who can handhold, somebody who can give you the right advice instead of just something that will say yes to what you are saying. So I feel those two things would be my parting remarks.
Thank you very much, sir. So I'll make a short conclusion. I think I'll go back to my former activities and as an exporter. The question for India is not if you should go or not. The question is when to go and how to go. So it is key to get very well prepared. As Raman said, it's a complex market, it's a huge market, it has several dimensions, but you cannot avoid thinking about India. I think getting prepared, getting sincere recommendations is also very important. So, Raman, Konark, really thank you very much for your help, for your very valuable point of views. I think it has been a great conversation. I hope the people in the attendance have enjoyed it. Are there any questions? Aurélien didn't share anything on the screen so far. So we are, of course, at your full disposal in India with Konark, Raman, here in France, and in all our subsidiaries throughout the world to start thinking of India if you're not in the country yet, or to brainstorm together if you want to further develop your business locally. Thank you all. It has been a great pleasure, and see you soon, online or live.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Raman, sir.